Got a fun bonus episode for you today here on Locked On Heat. In a second, I'll be joined by Sean Woodley and Brendon Kleen of Locked On Raptors and Locked On Suns. We're trying to put a Jimmy Butler trade together. At the very end, we finally come to sort of a conclusion here, but there's some really good insight as to where all these teams are coming from and how these negotiations might play out. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's go.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's a Locked On crossover. Sean Woodley here from Locked On Raptors. Third wheel in it with the two guys who host the shows covering the teams that are actually kind of at the center of the Jimmy Butler saga. Of course, you know by now, Jimmy Butler maybe doesn't want to be in Miami anymore. I don't know if he can say it any other way. Maybe he'll come up with new creative ways to express his displeasure with being on the Miami Heat. And the Phoenix Suns are out there wheeling and dealing, got out extra picks, and seem to want to go and do some Matt Ishbia stuff and get Jimmy Butler onto the Phoenix Suns. Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat and Brendon Kleen here as we are going to try, Brendon Kleen of Locked On Suns, that is. We are going to try to piece together a Jimmy Butler trade that works for everybody. And the reason I'm here as the host of a very bad teams podcast is the Raptors are in a position to help things along, to lubricate, if you will, to be the mediator as the Suns and the Heat, as Wes cringes at my use of the word lubricator, to be the guy, to be the team that kind of helps this sort of over the finish line.
Right. Grease the wheels is the parlance of NBA media.
Grease the wheels. That's correct. I feel like I've used grease the wheels so much that I'm looking for different words, and maybe I should go back to the thesaurus on that one and leave lubricator in the
keep looking.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's probably, we'll get into sort of constructions of trades that could work and whether any of us even want this coming up later, but we should start by just setting the stage of where everyone's at. Where's everyone heads at? Let's go to Wes first. Locked On Heat. Look, the Jimmy thing, it's been weird. He's suspended again after missing a team flight. He's been wearing Phoenix Suns colored shoes. What's the situation in Miami? Where do things stand right now? Do you think they want to trade Jimmy Butler for what is probably not going to be the return one would hope for Jimmy Butler or a player of that caliber? Do they want to try to ride this thing out? Where are they at this point?
They do want to trade Jimmy Butler. They've been a lot more active for about a week now. In trying to facilitate a trade, right? Like it's the meme of the guy leaning back in the gamer chair and then leaning forward. They're very much leaning forward, where basically since the beginning of the year, they were kind of leaning back. And they got those initial reports about them listening to offers and things like that. They're doing more than listening right now. They suspend Jimmy Butler for another 2 games. Importantly, 2 games on the road. Jimmy Butler has not and will not play a road game for the Miami Heat. His last road game was December 16th. When he had a triple-double in Detroit. Like, that's how long it's been since they've wanted this guy on the road with them. Everybody in the organization feels how awkward it is. It's permeated every single layer of the organization. And there's an understanding that, moving on would probably be better for us and for everybody. Not that they very much care about what Jimmy Butler wants at this stage, because that's kind of where it is. It's ugly and it's petty and it's a black cloud kind of hanging over this whole situation. So all of that is to say is, by suspending him for another 2 games, it does buy them a little bit more time. They have obviously been trying to work with Phoenix to try to figure something out. The Bradley Beal no trade clauses, I'm sure we'll get into, kind of mucks things up. It's been talked about enough. They have also talked to other teams about Jimmy Butler. I don't think that they feel any obligation to trade Jimmy Butler to where he wants to go because of how this has played out. Suspending them for another 2 games buys them some time, at least until Sunday. And then obviously the hard deadline being February 6th, the NBA trade deadline.
That's a pretty good rundown of the Heat situation. Brendon, for the Suns, they made that trade earlier this week with the Jazz where they turned 1 2031 unprotected pick into 3 first-rounders of varying degrees of goodness, and it just kind of gave them more volume of stuff to trade. Mark Stein kind of went into this a little bit like it could be for a Jimmy Butler trade, or it could just be to have more stuff to trade as a team that, kind of needs stuff to trade. There are different, it doesn't all have to be pointing towards Jimmy here, but what's the situation in Phoenix with those picks they just picked up from Utah? And of course, the Bradley Beal no trade clause, which hangs over this whole thing. Like, it all kind of sits with him, right?
It does. I think that the likelihood of Beal waiving that outside of going to an awful team, I think he would probably play ball in a lot of different scenarios at this point. And that's not sourced or anything, but I just have a hard time imagining, outside of the fact that we know he uprooted his off-season home in Los Angeles and kind of made Phoenix like his real home this off-season, and that has been reported, that everything outside of that is not looking good for him. I mean, you would say, well, he wants to win. Well, this team's not exactly doing that. They're underperforming for the second straight year. They're just above 500. Okay, well, he wants to be, kind of prioritized and prized as a person and as a player. Well, he just got benched, and there's not really any end in sight to that situation that he's going to be brought back into the starting lineup, because rookie Ryan Dunn, who replaced him, has done very solidly in that spot. So I tend to think that Beal would go somewhere relative, any solid team that would want him, I could see him going there.
Right.
As for the Suns, I think that they're still focused. I mean, 95% on Jimmy Butler? Like, yes, that first round pick that they broke into 3, I think that could be used for other things as well. They have this Yusuf Nurkic problem on their hands as well. Another veteran starter who had to be benched because of his underperformance. If they could swing a trade to get off of him and get something, even anything back for that, I think that could be how they use maybe one of those picks. But I think that they are still focused almost entirely on how they can get Jimmy Butler. And I guess my question for Wes, I'll kind of like in how these teams are thinking about it, I have one thing that I think kind of matters big picture from the Suns standpoint here that might help the average person understand why they're so dead set on doubling down on a season that has gone so terribly, is Kevin Durant didn't sign an extension last year. They would like him to sign one this upcoming summer. And if he does not, he will be going into an expiring final year of his contract next season. You would imagine that that is probably looming over this. My question for Wes is on the Heat side. We've heard this kind of golden ticket of cap space in 2026 that they might like as the big picture goal as they look through all these machinations. Is that kind of the overarching priority once you get past, okay, this situation is ugly and we need to move on from it?
It is, but only because they have to settle for it, right? Like if you could trade Jimmy Butler for a star player, you would just do that. Like if you didn't have to wait until 2026 to get that star player, they would do that. And they could still do that. If they trade Jimmy Butler, turn that into something, parlay that into that next star player, and you acquire that before the 2026 free agency, then yeah, of course, you just do that. But the one thing that the Heat are going to want is either A, an opportunity to go trade for that star player, or B, to go ahead and sign that star player. And we know the free agent class in 2026. We know what the names are. They're looking at those names. Now, stuff can happen, right? This summer, a lot of those players could just sign extensions, take themselves off the market. But for now, based on the fact that there's not any real great options out there for Miami, they want to make sure that at the very least, they don't take themselves out of the running for 2026.
And this is where this thing gets really difficult, which we'll get into the crazy attempts at machinations of trades here. But with Bradley Beal, you would like that probably rules them out of just like taking Beal back in this trade, right? Like that.
Correct.
It seems
he's
like
got 1 year left after.
team.
Right. He's got 1 year remaining after 2026 and 2027. And it would be one thing that even if, and this is why Bartelstein is out there in the media saying that he's not going to waive the no trade clause. He can accept a trade under the conditions of the no trade clause, but he's not going to remove it from his contract. If he were willing to remove it from the contract, I think the Heat would be at least more willing to entertain trading for Beal, because at least by that year, he'll be an expiring contract. And that's just much easier to deal. Even under this CBA, it's a lot easier to trade that than right now. But if he's not willing to waive that no trade clause, and that comes with him, I mean, that's what he didn't want 2 years ago when they were initially linked to Bradley Beal, and Bradley Beal had them as his number one option. But they said, unless you're going to get rid of that no trade clause, we're not going to do it, because the Heat, they value flexibility. Unless as long as they're not a team that they feel are in championship contention, the other thing that they want is flexibility to make sure that they can make those moves to get back to contention.
Right. Yeah, and where the Raptors come into all of this, as we'll get into some potential constructions of deals and other teams that might be involved. Are the Bucks still around? There was some maybe water poured on that idea by Chris Haynes yesterday. But the Raptors' role in all this is just like we talked about off the top, an agent to make all this a little bit easier financially. The new CBA is real difficult to make trades in. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, PA. We're having so much fun with the trade machine and all of our law degrees it requires to use it now. And the Raptors have some stuff to work with to help make life easier. They're not the Pistons. They don't have just cap space that guys can be dumped into, but they have a lot of expiring contracts. Bruce Brown makes $23 million bucks. He's a free agent this summer. You've got Chris Boucher makes about $11 million bucks. He's a free agent this summer. Davion Mitchell makes $6 million bucks. He's a free agent this summer. And even Kelly Olynyk for a team like the Heat, he makes $13 million bucks until the end of next year. So he would come off the books for that 2026 summer as well. He's been rumored as a guy the Raptors might move here too. Bruce Brown seems like the big sort of piece in all of this as a matching agent in these trades to help something get to the finish line. And the Raptors have some room. They're like $11.2 million bucks under the luxury tax. This is why they're able to kind of play the mediator, the team that can kind of get this thing to where it needs to go, if in fact it's going to get where it needs to go. But I can tell you for one thing, they're not going to be the team that takes on Bradley Beal. And I highly doubt Bradley Beal's like, yes, let's waive to go to Toronto to play for an 11-32 basketball team that probably doesn't want me. I don't think that is one of those teams that Brendon was alluding to that might be of Beal's sort of preference if he were to waive the trade, no trade clause. So that might involve a fourth team having to come in here. We could talk about what team that might be, how it might all work, and some various constructions of deals that could go down here coming up here in just 1 second. All right, we are back. We are talking about Jimmy Butler to the Suns and the Heat involvement and the Raptors involvement and maybe some other team or 5 other teams' involvements because it's just how the CBA works and it's got to be real complex for anything to go down in this financial environment. I guess like you guys are way more schooled in this than I am because I'm just kind of hanging on the sidelines. Like I said, third wheeling it. You guys are living this every day. Is this possible? Is there a world in which this happens? I guess Wes will throw to you. Like, first of all, what are the salary implications beyond just the Bradley Beal no trade clause, which we talked about? But like, what are the things at play? The Heat are a first apron team. For those who are, again, not schooled in the intricacies of the CBA, perhaps, what does that mean for them and what they can and cannot take back, and why a third team or fourth team might have to be involved here?
Yeah, I think the best way to just sort of explain even just both teams in terms of where they are at the apron is Miami can't take back more salary. The Suns also can't take back more salary and can't aggregate salary in a single trade. They can't combine players. They can only trade one player at a time and that's really it. And so there's a whole lot, like you said, it takes a lot of lawyer speak to kind of get through it. But that's really the nuts and bolts of what this boils down to.
Yeah, and ultimately, like, front offices are inventive. Where there's a will, there's a way most of the time, but it's going to involve multiple teams here. That's where the Raptors come in. The Bucks, again, were talked about earlier this week and reported by Ira Winderman and, a few other folks kind of out there just kind of sprinkling their name into the ether. But that one seems bizarre to me because, like, it doesn't make any sense to me for the Bucks to go gut their team to build around, like, a Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard backcourt for the future. That seems like a one-way track to Giannis wanting out in no time. And so, there might be another fourth team involved, but if these 3 teams are involved, have you guys like played around with the trade machine at all to figure anything out? I kind of have like a couple constructions in my mind that kind of work, but it all hinges on Bradley Beal going to Miami, which, as we talked about, is kind of a roadblock unless Miami gets a change of heart or, like you mentioned, he waives the no trade clause outright. I guess, Brendon, for you, like, anything come to mind as something that's a construction approaching A, legal, and B, something all these teams would be all right with?
Well, I'm not going to lie and say that I've set up a pristine 5-team trade in the trade machine that checks out everywhere. But to your point, I mean, the Suns being over the second apron complicates this as well, where they can't they can't send multiple players out together. They can't take back any more money than they're getting. All these sorts of things are one of the reasons that from the outset of all of this, it just looked like a long shot. And because of how ugly Jimmy has made it and how much the Suns have continued to struggle and everything else, I think that it's become maybe less of a long shot, but the rules haven't changed. And so I think that maybe where I need your guys' help, because I agree the Bucks thing, it never tracked for me. I don't, from a basketball standpoint, the idea of Bradley Beal making Milwaukee a thinner, older, and more injury-prone team, it just didn't, and probably worse defensive team, just did not really make a lot of sense. But is there anywhere that we could see Bradley Beal going that you guys can come up with here?
That's the problem. And Sean, you already said that, well, the Raptors wouldn't take Bradley Beal. And I understand that he's got the no trade clause, probably doesn't want to go to Toronto, but like, why wouldn't the Raptors want Bradley Beal? Like, why is that just an absolute no right off the top?
I think just the amount of money he makes for a team that already is rich in shooting guards who don't play defense. It's it's kind of just a weird fit with what they got going on. I mean, he's probably a better player than RJ Barrett or Grady Dick, like the two guys he would replace. And maybe that's all right. But I think for a team like the Raptors that is like trying to build something, not only like through the draft, but they have a lot of guys in house they're trying to develop. I think having Bradley Beal on the team would probably complicate matters there a little bit, and it just would be this sort of big financial headache hanging over the team where
and
Scotty
one
Barnes is
first-round
on his
pick
max next year.
One first-round pick wouldn't be enough to just be like, yeah, you know what, we're building through the draft, let's get more picks.
Yeah, probably not, especially since most of those picks that are coming over to Phoenix in that Utah trade, like they're all probably Cleveland picks, and I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. So they're probably not going to be great picks you're getting there in whatever 24 or 2025, 27 or 29, whatever those picks all convey. And so, yeah, like I think they'd really have to have the pot sweetened and really believe that Bradley Beal can be like conducive to like a forward building version of the Toronto Raptors. And I'm just not sure you can bank on that. And also, Scotty Barnes hits his max contract next year. Emmanuel quickly makes $35 million. Like, I don't think they want to hamstring themselves with that big a contract when it's kind of go time for them next year. They're really bad this year, and they might not be great next year, but I think they're going to go into next year. You know, they're going to have a very high pick, most likely. Maybe they get super lucky and get a Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper who help accelerate things along. But even if they don't, there's enough young talent here and guys who are sort of, you know, very early in their progression as players that you could talk yourself into this team having something like a Pistons-like jump from being a very bad bottom of the East team to somewhere more towards the play-in and sort of using that as a launching pad for more down the line. And I think that whole sort of building process gets more difficult if Bradley Beal's on the team. And again, it requires Bradley Beal to say, yeah, send me to Toronto, baby. Let's do this thing, which it feels maybe far-fetched. But Brendon, yeah, you got something?
Yeah, so, well, Wes, back to you. I think that the thing with the Beal destination is that most likely the role players, veteran role players who add up to somewhere in the neighborhood of Beal's salary are probably the players who end up going back to Miami. Right. So we kind of talked at the beginning, like, because the Butler situation has gone sideways, Miami is sort of settling for this dream of future cap space, but that's 18 months from now. So what do they want between now and then? Does it matter who these players are, or is it to the point where maybe the pick asset that they might get back and that eventual salary flexibility and salary relief is sort of all that matters, and it's interchangeable whether it's a Tim Hardaway Jr. or a Bruce Brown or a Keldon Johnson? Like, do they care?
They care a little bit, right? Because they still want to be competitive. They really want to make the playoffs this year. If they don't, you know, their picks become unprotected. We don't need to get into it, but it would be bad. So they want to make the playoffs this year. They want to be competitive next year, and then hopefully enter 2026 with a lot of cap space. So in terms of the players that they're getting back, as long as they're maintaining that cap space, they want them to be helpful, right? But I think if you're, like, to your point, like, that's a big salary that they have to match. Chances are the players you're getting back are going to be relatively helpful. They're not going to be star players like Jimmy Butler was for 5 years, but they'll be part of the rotation. And I think that's about it. Like, I don't think they're asking for a whole lot here. If it's Bruce Brown, if it's Tim Hardaway, if it's Tobias Harris, if it's Kelly Olynyk, any of these guys could be a part of the rotation. I think that's fine. And then and when you add the draft picks part of this too, they're going to want some draft capital back. And then that's where it sort of becomes a sliding scale of, all right, well, if we get like a really like a B+ level player back, we don't necessarily need a B+ draft pick back. If we get a B+ player, maybe we could take a C+ draft pick back or something like that. So you start kind of getting into the puzzle pieces of it all. But they're going to want either like a valuable pick or at least a high-level rotation player back so that they can remain competitive.
This is all going to be so easy.
Well, and the reason, Sean, I asked you why you don't want Bradley Beal, and it was almost like it was almost rhetorical because
Sure.
I know, but I wanted you to explain it because I feel like not only is Toronto in that headspace, but there's a lot of teams in that headspace also. Where like, first of all, we don't even know if he wants to play here, and second of all, it's $50 million for a guy who's not that good anymore. What are we going to do with this? So you asked the question about like what teams I could see out there. The one team that keeps coming up, whether I see it in fake trades or or do like a little bit of reporting on this, is the Chicago Bulls. And this idea that they would send Levine, and I've seen this mocked up, but the idea that they would send Levine, I suppose, to Milwaukee, and that they would take on Bradley Beal and then get a draft pick out of it. I have not heard the question of why. Like, why would Chicago do that? Is it simply just it's
Why
not a
does
better
Chicago
contract?
do anything?
No, I mean, and maybe that's all it is they see the bright lights of Bradley Beal and they're like, this guy, and like they haven't seen stats for like the last 5 seasons. And it's like, this guy still scores 30 points per game. But to get 1 or 2 draft picks back doesn't feel like something that they should do. And yet I keep seeing it. Am I the only one confused by it is sort of my question.
I'm completely confused, which is why on my show, I've barely even engaged with that idea because Zach LaVine is better, healthier, and cheaper than Bradley
and a
Beal.
great locker room guy.
Right.
Everybody loves him. Like,
Right.
And so the idea that it would just take one of these, let's be honest, pretty crappy first round picks that the Suns now have, and that would do it, that would be enough to convince the Bulls, who are sort of finally trying to reset things and rebuild, to take on an older player who gets hurt more often and is more expensive and all that sort of stuff. I just really have a hard time believing it.
And then the other part of this too is like a team like Utah that is not really doing anything here except for actively losing and trying to draft more players. If they weren't
really
willing
good at, by the way, they're nailing it.
Yeah, crushing it. And they got to start winning at some point. Like they're going to ruin their culture or whatever. Different conversation. But even if they weren't willing to take on Bradley Beal and get that 2031 pick.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of like a team that could theoretically. Now, again, Beal might have not waived his no trade clause to go to Salt Lake City, and that might have been the whole thing. But I just don't really see a lot of teams that want Beal. It's why I kind of never paid attention to the Milwaukee thing. Like, why would they trade Middleton, who's old and unhealthy, for Bradley Beal, who's old and unhealthy, and even more, it makes almost twice as much as him. Like, that never really added up to me either. And then you just saw Chris Haynes come out here and pour water on that. So the one team I go back to is Detroit.
Yeah.
Like I'm still on the show. Like I still think Beal can help a team. Like he's not like this broken player. He could still help the right team. He's just a really bad fit in Phoenix. And if you get him, spaces the floor next to Cade Cunningham, good locker room presence, veteran, which is obviously something that the Pistons are valuing right now. And and maybe somebody would ask, well, why would Bradley Beal want to go to Detroit? It's like, well, they're the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference right now. No offense,
They basically
Brendon,
have
but
the
like
same record as the Suns.
And if they have the same record as the Suns and they're in the easier conference, if you want to play in the
nice
playoffs, you have a better chance of doing it in Detroit than you do in Phoenix right now. So I don't know, like why not? And if you're the Pistons, maybe you get a pick or two.
Yeah, it's very possible that our pal Kuka Heel should have been in my spot here on this podcast. But I needed the content today. So
to be fair, the Pistons haven't really been reported linked to it.
Yeah.
It's just like if you go through the list, there's only 30 teams, you kind of come back to them.
Right.
Yeah, they're just the team that has cap space, so it kind of makes things easy. I have a very easy trade, by the way, guys.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Make
it happen.
I have a very easy trade. It just requires the Heat to suck it up and accept Bradley Beal on their team. And hey, look, the Heat love stars. Maybe they talk themselves, go to like Pat Riley. We can tap back into the well of Bradley Beal, former star. Maybe, just maybe. I don't know. Just put in a word, would you, Wes? Because this makes it so easy. The Toronto Raptors send Bruce Brown to the Heat. The Butler thing goes to the Suns, and then Bradley Beal goes to the Heat. And to make it all work and make the salaries adequate, the Miami Heat dump Terry Rozier to the Toronto Raptors. And then we figure out the picks from there. But like Rozier could help the Raptors going into next year. They don't have any guards ever. They just like have gone one guard only for the last 5 years, and it's not working out so hot. So like having another one would be nice. This is also kind of in line with the thing they're doing this year with these expiring guys, where they're trying to turn them into something, anything. And if they can, great. If not, they walk and it's fine. And I think that would be a similar thing for Rozier. They kind of run it back over to next year with this sort of, plan of kind of being a bad team, like a bad team should. I know Rozier has not been very good for the Heat, so maybe that is something where they're happy to get off that money. And it's just, I don't know how the picks all shake out here. Maybe it's one pick to the Raptors, but yeah.
This is interesting because now you're not only getting off of the Jimmy Butler situation, but you're also getting off the Terry Rozier situation, which is a trade that just has not worked.
Yeah.
They traded a first-round pick in Kyle Lowry last January for Terry Rozier, and he's been bad.
Yeah.
So if the Raptors were now, I think that there's more of an urgency among the Heat fan base to move Terry Rozier than there is within the Heat's front office to move Terry Rozier, because at the end of the day, his contract does come off the books after next season, right in time for that 2026 free agency. So if they just have to eat it for another year, they'll eat it. But it's almost like a two of our problems for one of yours.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier for just Bradley Beal. I still don't see them doing it unless Beal were to waive the no trade clause, but it is an interesting one. I have one that I want to counter with, though.
Can we do that? We'll do that coming up in just 1 second. We'll finish off with Wes's beautiful, perfect trade construction. 14 teams, it all works. Success in the trade machine. We'll get into that and ask the question as well. Does anyone even want this? We will get into that coming up to close out this special Locked On crossover. All right, Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat has himself a trade. What you got? What's your suggestion here to make all this Jimmy Butler craziness go away?
So it's a 4-teamer that includes all of our teams plus Detroit.
Okay.
The Suns get Jimmy Butler. Congrats. I like Brendan's whole role here is like, I'm getting Jimmy Butler in this one too. It's because that's all the Suns can do. They can't do anything else. And Beal's going where?
Yeah, you're going to suggest a trade that doesn't include that, and my box on the screen will just disappear.
Right. I have 2 trades, but this is the first one. So I got Jimmy to Phoenix. Beal goes to Detroit. The Raptors get Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr.
Okay.
So you get Hardaway's expiring, and then Tobias Harris is sort of like the Rozier thing. It's like decent player, kick it into next year. Maybe he's an expiring next year that you could trade and flip for something else. Sort of Bruce Brown 2.0. And then the Heat get Bruce Brown's expiring, Chris Boucher's expiring, and then Kelly Olynyk, who's under contract through next year, obviously has some familiarity with Miami. That's the trade. Oh, and then the Suns have those 3 first-round picks. Make it easy. Each of these teams get one of those first-round picks. They just sort of they argue about which ones they get, and nobody really cares. But yeah, the 3 first-round picks split amongst the Heat, the Pistons, and the Raptors.
I think I dig it. I think I'm in this. Yeah, for the Raptors end, it's, what happens with the salaries they bring in, as long as they're not super long-term money and they're coming off by the end of next summer where, they don't think they want to commit to this sort of have these veterans they don't really want for too many years thing. But next year, they're probably not going to be amazing. So certainly could work. Hardaway's an expiring. That's fine. And then, yeah, you get a pick out of it. You turn the problem is, I guess, it's not a problem necessarily. I think the Raptors kind of fancy themselves able to get a bunch of seconds for Olynyk and Brown and Boucher, maybe like 1 for each individually. Does getting 1 sort of first rounder for those 3 guys maybe not quite scratch the itch? I honestly think it's fine, because I think second rounders are just candy you can pick up for $1 at the store and it's fine. And if you can get a first, like, there's some cachet to having one of those on hand. And so I don't think I'm totally opposed to it. Considering a month ago, I thought they were getting absolutely nothing for Bruce Brown or Chris Boucher or Kelly Olynyk, who could barely move a month ago. Turning all 3 into a first rounder doesn't sound terrible. And head, there's maybe more they can do with Tobias Harris next year, closer to the deadline, or he just walks and you get that salary relief. So I don't think this is like maybe quite as good as the Rozier idea if the Heat just want to suck it up and take on Beal, but I don't think I would like lose my mind if this were the deal either.
What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, as long as the Suns get Jimmy Butler and send away Bradley Beal, I mean, like, that's like, just to, I guess, add some color on that side of things, like I've mentioned multiple times, like this season and this construction of this Suns team is questionable regardless of whether they get Jimmy Butler or not. So I do think for the Suns that a big part of the push would be the ability to get off of Beal. I mean, I know in this trade, every trade, that has to happen because of the second apron. They literally have, Beal is the only guy outside of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant that even can go out to make this legal. But maybe that helps people kind of understand some of what I think the desperation is from the Suns. I don't think anyone's necessarily thinking Jimmy will just fix it. But if you can get off of the guy who's clearly making things worse, I think that goes a long way. So anything where those 2 things happen, count me in.
I've got one more similar version to this.
Okay.
And this is where it would take the front office, specifically Phoenix's and Chicago's, to get pretty creative to try to figure out how this exactly works. But it would have to be two separate trades. But here's basically the parts that get moved. Miami gets the same thing. They get Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher.
Right.
Phoenix gets Jimmy Butler again. They also get Patrick Williams from Chicago.
Ooh.
The Bulls get Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic. And I think the Bulls do this because Patrick Williams kind of stinks, but he's making 18 million.
38% field goal percentage, Patrick Williams. Yeah.
but plays
He's still averaging 10 points and 4 rebounds.
He's a big body that Phoenix can use. I think if you were able to get off of Nurkic, if you were able to basically just turn Nurkic, who's unplayable, into Patrick
Suns
Williams,
fans
into
are
semi-playable.
Already talking themselves into him, Wes. So you don't
Right?
even have to sell it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And if you're the Bulls, you do it because you kind of signed Patrick Williams to this really bad contract, and now you get Nurkic, whose contract expires 3 years before Patrick Williams's does. And so Chicago gets more cap flexibility going forward. The Bulls get Beal. Not sure if I said that yet. They send Zach LaVine to Toronto, who, as Michael Grange pointed out, the Raptors are looking for a significant piece to pair alongside Scotty Barnes. Sean, we were talking before we started recording. I said, what do you need next to Scotty Barnes? You said shooting. Zach LaVine, amazing shooter. I think he would be great in Toronto. And the Bulls, because the Raptors are giving up Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, Chris Boucher, they got to pay up for Zach LaVine. That's a good player. Sure. I think, how many picks does it take for the Bulls to do this? You get one from Phoenix, a couple from Toronto. Now for Chicago, you're getting 3 first-round picks. You're getting Beal. You lose LaVine, but you're also off the Patrick Williams contract. So this is why Chicago does it. Beal gets to play in Chicago. People like that. The Suns get what they want. Toronto gets their significant piece, and the Miami gets what they want, which is not Jimmy Butler.
It's not crazy. Certainly not. And look,
I think a little too close to quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's too close to like Barrett and Grady Dick defensively, and like you can figure that out if you need to. Like you probably move Barrett in the summer if this is the case, and you just go, oops, no defense for the rest of this season as you iron it out. I think because LaVine's only around for 2 more years, he's got the player option the last year of his deal. I wonder if the Raptors would want to pony up like a lot of pick capital there. Like I think maybe the most they'd go, because I don't think they want to compromise their ability to kind of make a big swing. And I don't think LaVine is not a big swing, but I also don't think he's quite the echelon of player that they really like to go and try to play around with in the coming years as one of like 7 teams in the league that has access to all of their picks. But I do think like they have a Blazers 2nd rounder this year, which will be a good one. They've got the Pacers 1st round pick in 2026, which for a while this year looked like it was going to be some prime ticket type of pick, but they've kind of figured themselves out. And
what if that's
maybe you feel?
What if it's the Portland 2nd and then Indiana's 1st?
I don't think that's crazy. I think
maybe
you
a
could
swap.
Probably talk yourself into that. Yeah, I think that's not nuts. And then you probably, if you're the Raptors, you figure out a way. Can you go and try to flip Grady Dick into and RJ Barrett in the summer into like an upgrade on the wing for a team that's maybe light on defense, that are light on offense, that maybe can send some defense back your way. Not crazy. I ultimately think the Raptors are going to hold off on any sort of big swing trade until they see what the draft bears. Because if they just get Cooper Flagg, then their next big piece thing is kind of sorted out. But of course, that's not a super likely thing. I just don't know if they're going to want to kind of burden their books too much before they know what this summer produces draft-wise. But I don't hate it, Wes. And I know there's a few people who listen to Locked On Raptors who are little sickos about Zach LaVine who will love that you just threw his name out there. Hi, Ben. And so, I think I don't know if we have any closing thoughts here. If we want to wrap it up, or Brendon, if you have any parting shots on this one. I feel like we've done some good trade machining, though, guys.
We've done a great job. Salute to all of you guys. My box was very easy to check, but for what it's worth, the Suns have worked in a very specific way since they notoriously blew through the second apron, as the owner said it to Brian Windhorst in the summer of 2023. They have basically shopped around these deal formations, these multi-team deal formations, and then just said, plug yourself in here. And in the Yusuf Nurkic or the DeAndre Ayton offloading when they got in on the Damian Lillard mess, they didn't know if they were getting Grayson Allen or Victor Oladipo until like the week it all came together. They just knew the deal works legally with all of our rules in this way. These teams may be involved, and these salaries on those teams fit. And so the latest that we've heard here locally in Phoenix is that the Suns are shopping around a 5-team construction. We know the other team, one of them has to be Miami, of course, and they're just trying to find 3 other teams who work. So they are literally doing exactly what we are doing. And I frankly, because we've talked about how basic this Suns ask is of, we get off Beal, we get Butler, we have these 3 firsts and 1 second, and hey, if we could get off Nurkic, that'd be great too. They are just probably working the phone saying, okay, here's the guys on your roster who fit in the holes we have in this formation. Yes or no? Okay, no. All right, next team. You know what I mean? And so it is it's a very silly world that I think the CBA has kind of forced all these teams to live in, but it is the reality. And once they can find those magic other teams, I think this thing just gets done. It's just a matter of if.
That's an interesting thing there. And at the risk of us going too long, like Brendon, do you think you said there's a 5-team construction, just sort of, take your puzzle piece and put it in there. Do you think it's only Phoenix and Miami, or do you think maybe there's a 3rd team involved that says, yeah, we've got that, we're ready to play ball here, find the other 2 teams?
Very well could be. I mean, it's John Gambadoro, whom people might know from Twitter at this point, who's broken a lot of Suns news, and he's usually pretty good about being specific and not, being vague. So I think if that other 3rd team was concrete and locked in already, we probably would already know it. But there could be some use for that team to, not want that out there, because if it doesn't happen, then it's only so many guys that could have been going out, and then that gets a little messy. So we'll see. But they clearly have a very specific idea of what it has to look like, and I think it's on the Suns right now to go out and get it.
And that's why they do the trade with the picks that they do, because those picks are placed in those holes, and it's up to some teams to come scoop them up.
And if it's going to be 5 teams and you got to dish it around and spread the wealth a little bit, having one 2031 pick doesn't really do you much good, because there's so much that has to get done within one deal. And so I think that's where they are.
Well, my head hurts. For more Trade Machine Mad Libs, please tune in to our shows, Locked On Raptors, Locked On Heat, Locked On Suns. Surely not the last time any of us will be talking about this between now and February the 6th. Please be sure to follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. Of course, subscribe to our daily newsletters as well. LockedOnDaily.com to go and do that. You'll get it right to your inbox for free 5 days a week. Our thoughts, our takes, our national stories and coverage from Katie Heindel and Michael Shearer. It's great. Please go. Be sure to do that, and we will talk to you again very soon. Thanks so much for hanging. Bye.